The Vrex Armada stretched across 3-star systems, their crimson ships blotting out entire suns as they moved through space like a plague of metal locusts. Admiral Kethvar stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the holographic display show their latest conquest. Another species had fallen to their might, another world stripped bare of its resources. The humans still refused to respond to our ultimatum, reported his communications officer, mandibles clicking nervously. Kethvar's 6 eyes glowed with amusement. The humans had been silent for over 2,000 years, retreating to their small corner of the galaxy after some ancient conflict. Most species considered them extinct or irrelevant. Their few remaining worlds showed no signs of advanced technology, no defensive fleets, nothing but primitive settlements scattered across a handful of planets. Perhaps they have forgotten how to speak, Kethvar chittered, causing laughter to ripple through his bridge crew. The Vrex had conquered 47 different species in the past century alone. Each had begged, pleaded, or threatened before falling to their superior firepower. The human silence was merely proof of their weakness. The galaxy had learned to fear the Vrex war machine. Their ships could crack planets, their soldiers could survive in any environment, and their hunger for expansion seemed limitless. No alliance had been able to stand against them. The Altair Federation had lasted 3 months. The Crystal Hegemony fell in 6 weeks. Even the mighty Zephyrian Empire, with their legendary psychic warriors, had crumbled within a year. Set course for the human systems, Kethvar commanded. We'll finish this quickly and move on to more profitable ventures. The Armada began its inexorable march toward human space, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Intelligence reports suggested the humans had perhaps a dozen ships total, ancient vessels that would crumble at the first sign of real combat. It would be less than a battle, more like stepping on insects. But in the depths of space, something stirred. On Luna Base, deep beneath the moon's surface, Director Sarah Chun stood before a massive vault door that hadn't been opened in 2 millennia. Ancient warning symbols covered its surface in dozens of languages, most from civilizations long dead. The door itself was made of materials that current human science couldn't replicate, forged in the fires of a war most had chosen to forget. "Are you certain about this?" asked General Martinez, his weathered face showing the strain of recent weeks. "The cost of what's behind that door." Sarah's hand hovered over the biometric scanner. Around them, the facility hummed with barely contained energy, systems that had waited centuries for this moment beginning to awaken. "The Vrex left us no choice. They've made it clear that surrender isn't an option." The scanner accepted her genetic signature, cross-referenced it with quantum encryption protocols that predated faster-than-light travel, and began the unsealing process. Mechanisms older than most galactic civilizations groaned to life, and slowly, impossibly, the vault door began to open. Inside lay humanity's greatest shame and its most terrible weapon, the Prometheus Archive. 2,000 years ago, humanity had nearly destroyed itself in a war that reshaped entire solar systems. They had created weapons that could unravel matter at the quantum level, ships that existed partially outside normal space-time, and soldiers enhanced beyond recognition. When the war finally ended, the survivors had made a choice that would define their species for millennia. They sealed away their weapons of mass destruction and chose peace. They became farmers, traders, explorers. They helped other species develop, shared knowledge freely, and avoided conflict whenever possible. The galaxy had largely forgotten that humans had once been something else entirely. But the Vrex had made a crucial error in their intelligence gathering. They saw only the peaceful farmers and traders. They missed the carefully hidden infrastructure, the sleeper facilities buried in asteroid fields and planetary cores, the genetic locks that could only be opened when humanity faced extinction. As the vault opened fully, Sarah stepped inside and activated systems that had waited centuries for this moment. Across human space, buried facilities began to wake. Ships that existed as mere blueprints in quantum storage started materializing in hidden shipyards. Soldiers who had volunteered for extended hibernation began to stir in their cryogenic chambers. The message went out on channels that hadn't been used since the old war, encrypted with protocols that turned photons themselves into keys. To human colonies across a dozen worlds, The signal was simple and terrifying. The long peace is over. Prometheus Protocol is active. May God forgive us for what we must become again. In deep space, the Vrex Armada continued its advance, unaware that they had just awakened something that had once made the galaxy tremble in terror. Captain Marcus Reed opened his eyes for the first time in 800 years. The cryogenic chamber's diagnostics ran automatically, checking his vital signs as nanobots in his bloodstream began reactivating dormant neural pathways. His enhanced physiology, dormant for centuries, started coming online system by system. Around him, the Perseus station's resurrection bay hummed with activity as 200 other Prometheus soldiers began their awakening. These weren't the peaceful humans the galaxy knew. They were the remnants of humanity's warrior caste, volunteers who had chosen to sleep until their species faced extinction. Marcus's first clear thought was a question: how bad is it? The answer came through direct neural link from the station's AI. The Vrex Armada. 47 conquered species. No survivors taken. An empire built on genocide approaching human space with overwhelming force. Marcus stood on legs that remembered combat, muscle memory intact despite centuries of sleep. His body was no longer entirely human. Genetic modifications and quantum-enhanced neurons made him something more. Around him, his unit was awakening to the same horrible necessity that had created them long ago. Meanwhile, in the outer rim of human space, the farming colony on Kepler 442b received the Prometheus signal. Administrator James Park, a man who had spent 30 years growing hybrid wheat that could feed dozens of worlds, walked calmly to his barn and pressed his hand against what appeared to be an ordinary support beam. The beam scanned his genetics, confirmed his authorization, and the barn began to transform. The floor opened to reveal a command center that had been waiting beneath the soil for generations. Weapon systems that had been disguised as irrigation equipment powered up. The grain silos split open to reveal missile batteries capable of cracking moons. Park's wife found him there an hour later, staring at displays showing the approaching Vrex fleet. "How many of us knew?" she asked quietly. "About 1 in 10,000, Park replied, his farmer's hand steady as he activated defensive systems. "Every colony has guardians. People who volunteered to remember what we used to be, just in case we needed to become it again." The transformation was happening across human space. On New Geneva, the university's archaeology department professor opened a vault containing weapons that manipulated gravity itself. The mining stations in the asteroid belt revealed that they had been stripping rare metals not for trade, but to build ships whose existence had been hidden in quantum storage. Most shocking of all was the awakening of the sleeper fleet. In the dead space between stars, where no sensors could detect them, massive structures began powering up. They had drifted for 2 millennia, disguised as asteroids or hidden in the shadow of gas giants. Each one contained a fully operational warship, held in quantum suspension until the day they were needed again. The ISV Fury was the first to fully materialize. At 3 kilometers long, it dwarfed anything in the current human fleet. Its hull was made of folded space-time, making it partially exist outside normal reality. Its weapons could fire through dimensional barriers, and its crew were the enhanced soldiers now awakening across human space. Admiral Jessica Torres materialized on the Fury's bridge as systems that had been theoretical when the ship was built came online. Her body bore the same modifications as Marcus and the other Prometheus soldiers: enhanced reflexes, quantum-entangled neural networks, and genetic modifications that let her interface directly with her ship's consciousness. She wasn't alone. Across 100 hidden locations, the sleeper fleet was awakening. Ships with names like Vengeance, Retribution, and Divine Wrath, vessels built not for exploration or defense, but for the complete annihilation of threats to human existence. The Vrex continued their approach, still confident in their superiority. Their scouts reported the same handful of primitive human ships, the same defenseless colonies. They had no way to detect quantum-suspended vessels or genetic locks that were older than their civilization. But other species in the galaxy had longer memories. On the neutral trading station Nexus Prime, Ambassador Veltar of the Altair Federation, one of the few survivors of the Vrex conquest, received an encrypted message on a channel that shouldn't have existed. The message was simple, a human diplomatic seal, and coordinates for a meeting. Veltar's people had been traders and negotiators for thousands of years. They remembered when humans had been more than farmers. Their archives spoke of the old war, of weapons that had made entire solar systems uninhabitable, of the terrible choice humanity had made to seal away their military might. The meeting location was an abandoned research station in unclaimed space. When Veltar arrived, he found himself facing a woman whose appearance made his survival instincts scream warnings. Admiral Torres looked human, but the subtle wrongness in her movements, the way light seemed to bend around her, and the depth of knowledge in her eyes marked her as something else. This was what humans had been before they chose peace. Apex predators who had evolved not just intelligence, but the will and ability to remake themselves into perfect instruments of war. The Prometheus Protocol has been activated, Torres said without preamble. We know what the Vrex have done to your people and others. We're offering you a choice. Veltar's translator struggled with the tonal complexities of her words, but the meaning was clear. What kind of choice? Help us evacuate any survivors from Vrex-controlled space, or watch us turn their entire armada into quantum static. There won't be a third option. For the first time in months, Veltar felt something other than despair. The humans were offering mercy, but only to those who deserved it. The Vrex had made their choice when they chose genocide over coexistence. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place as humanity's true diplomatic corps, ambassadors who carried the authority to speak for species that could reshape reality, began reaching out to other survivors. The Vrex Armada was now only days from the first human world, still unaware that they were about to face an enemy that had spent 2,000 years hoping they would never have to fight again. Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical display with growing confusion. His advanced scouts had reached the outer edges of human space, expecting to find the same defenseless colonies their intelligence suggested. Instead, they found nothing. Not destroyed, simply gone. Report, he commanded, his mandibles clicking with irritation. The human settlements on Kepler, 442b show no life signs, Admiral, his tactical officer reported. No bodies, no signs of struggle. The colonists appear to have simply vanished. What Kethvar didn't know was that the evacuation had been planned for centuries. Every human colony had hidden bunkers, quantum storage facilities, and evacuation protocols that could move entire populations to safety within hours. The primitive settlements had been carefully designed facades, ready to be abandoned the moment the long peace ended. The real human population was now safely relocated to fortress worlds deep in the interior, protected by defensive systems that had been built in secret over 2 millennia. What the Vrex would find was exactly what humanity wanted them to find, a puzzle designed to draw them deeper into the trap. Captain Marcus Reed stood on the bridge of the ISV Fury as it emerged from quantum suspension in the shadow of a gas giant. Around him, his crew of enhanced soldiers moved with inhuman precision, each one connected to the ship's consciousness through neural links that turned thought into action. Vrex Advance Fleet detected, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, her enhanced eyes tracking targets that existed partially outside normal space. 12 ships, heading for the Kepler system. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar cold clarity that came with combat preparation. His body was no longer entirely human. 2,000 years ago, volunteers like him had undergone modifications that pushed the boundaries of what their species could become. Enhanced reflexes, quantum-entangled neural networks, and genetic modifications that allowed them to survive in conditions that would kill baseline humans. Prepare the Wraith Protocol, he ordered. The Fury began to change, its hull folding through dimensions until it existed partially outside normal reality. To enemy sensors, it would appear as nothing more than cosmic background radiation. But its weapons could still fire through the dimensional barriers, striking targets from angles that shouldn't exist in normal space. The Vrex Advance Fleet entered the Kepler system expecting easy conquest. What they found instead was a demonstration of why humanity had once made the galaxy tremble. The first Vrex ship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, not destroyed, but unraveled at the quantum level as human weapons that manipulated fundamental forces struck from impossible angles. Contact. Unknown weapons, screamed the Vrex communications before the second ship was torn apart by gravitational forces that compressed it into a sphere the size of a basketball. Admiral Kethvar watched the destruction through quantum entanglement communicators, his confidence evaporating as his advanced fleet was systematically eliminated by an enemy he couldn't see. "Full sensor sweep," he commanded. "Find them." But the human ships existed partially outside normal spacetime. Vrex sensors, designed to detect conventional matter and energy, couldn't track targets that flickered between dimensions. It was like trying to grab smoke with armored claws. The third Vrex ship lasted longer, its commander desperately trying evasive maneuvers as reality warped around him. Human weapons didn't just destroy, they violated the basic laws of physics, turning matter inside out, reversing causality in localized areas, and creating temporal paradoxes that made ships exist in multiple timelines simultaneously. When the last ship was gone, Marcus allowed the Fury to phase back into normal space. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 minutes. 12 ships that had terrorized dozens of worlds were now nothing but quantum echoes. "Signal all sleeper fleet units," Marcus ordered. "Phase 2 is authorized." Across human space, 100 hidden ships began to move. Each one represented technology that the current galaxy couldn't comprehend. Vessels that could travel through folded space, weapons that fired backwards through time, and crews that had volunteered to become something more than human to protect those who remained human. But the true shock was yet to come. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Kethvar received a communication on an impossible frequency. The signal bypassed all his ship's defenses and appeared directly on his command screens, carrying a simple message in perfect Vrex. "This is Admiral Jessica Torres of the Human Defense Fleet. You have entered sovereign human space with hostile intent. You have 30 standard hours to withdraw your forces beyond the galactic border. This is your only warning." Kethvar's 6 eyes blazed with rage. Human Defense Fleet? Their entire military couldn't fill a cargo bay on my smallest ship. His intelligence officer, however, was frantically checking their databases. What he found made his carapace turn pale. "Admiral, I'm finding references to humans in our oldest conquest archives. Before our expansion began, there are mentions of a species that fought a war so terrible it changed the fundamental structure of several star systems." "Impossible," Kethvar snarled. "The humans we've observed are weak farmers and traders. Sir, according to these records, the humans fought a civil war 2,000 years ago using weapons that could crack planets. The war ended when both sides agreed to seal away their military technology. The reports suggest they chose to become farmers and traders to avoid destroying themselves." The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. If the humans had voluntarily given up weapons capable of planetary destruction, what did they still possess? What kind of species chose to become peaceful because their own power terrified them? His answer came sooner than expected. A new contact appeared on his sensors, impossible to miss because it was the size of a small moon. The vessel that materialized before his fleet defied every principle of engineering Kethvar understood. It seemed to fold in on itself repeatedly, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The human dreadnought Prometheus itself had awakened. "This is your final warning." Admiral Torres' voice echoed across all Vrex communication channels simultaneously. "You have 29 hours and 57 minutes to leave human space. After that, we will demonstrate why our ancestors chose to sleep rather than remain awake." For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before: fear. Not of death. He had faced death in countless battles. This was fear of something worse. Fear of facing an enemy that had deliberately made itself forget how to be what it truly was, and had now chosen to remember. The 30-hour countdown had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had once been its most terrifying predators. Admiral Kethvar made the decision that would define the final moments of the Vrex Empire. Despite the impossible demonstration of human power, despite the warnings that defied comprehension, pride and arrogance ruled his choice. "Signal the fleet," he commanded. "Full advance. These humans may have hidden weapons, but we are Vrex. We bow to no one." His war council exchanged uncertain glances. The destruction of their advanced fleet had been complete, and inexplicable. But Kethvar's authority was absolute, and questioning him meant death. The massive Vrex armada began its final approach to human space, 3,000 ships strong, carrying enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, a testament to centuries of conquest and subjugation. They had 6 hours left in their deadline. Admiral Jessica Torres stood in the command center of Prometheus Base, a facility that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Around her, holographic displays showed the approaching Vrex fleet in perfect detail. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical formation analyzed by artificial intelligences that had been refining combat algorithms for 2 millennia. "They're not stopping," reported Captain Reed from the ISV Fury. "All Vrex forces maintaining approach vector." Torres nodded, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. The countdown wasn't just a warning. It was humanity's way of giving the Vrex time to make the right choice, to prove they were different from the monsters who had created the old war. They had chosen to be monsters. "Signal all fleet commanders," Torres said quietly. "Execute Omega Protocol. Show them what we were. Show them why we chose to sleep." Across human space, the response was immediate and terrifying. The first sign was the stars themselves beginning to flicker. Human ships equipped with stellar manipulators, weapons so terrible they had been banned by humanity's own moral code, began their work. They weren't destroying stars. They were borrowing energy from them, channeling the power of nuclear fusion directly into weapon systems that could reshape reality. The Vrex fleet suddenly found themselves surrounded by impossible geometries. Space itself began to fold, creating maze-like structures that trapped their ships in recursive loops. The humans had weaponized mathematics, turning the fundamental laws of physics into instruments of war. "What is this?" Kethvar screamed as his flagship found itself flying through the same corridor of space repeatedly, unable to break free from the dimensional trap. His answer came in the form of the human fleet finally, revealing itself in its full glory. They materialized from folded space like nightmares given form. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their hulls crackling with energies that made reality shimmer around them. The smallest human vessel was larger than Kethvar's flagship, and there were hundreds of them. But it wasn't their size that made the Vrex crew scream in terror, it was their design. These ships had been built by a species that understood war on a level that transcended physical destruction. They were instruments of entropy itself, designed to unravel the fundamental forces that held matter together. The human dreadnought Ragnarok emerged at the center of the formation, a ship so large it had its own gravitational field. Its weapons weren't mounted on the hull. They were woven into the fabric of space-time around it, turning empty vacuum into a weapon of mass destruction. "This is Admiral Torres." Her voice echoed across every communication channel in the Vrex fleet, the words carrying harmonics that somehow resonated in the quantum structure of their ships' hulls. "You were warned. You chose conquest over wisdom. You chose genocide over coexistence. Now you will learn what humanity becomes when we stop choosing to be better than our nature." The battle, if it could be called that, began. Human weapons fired backwards through time, striking Vrex ships before the triggers were pulled. Reality warped as gravitational manipulators created localized black holes that consumed entire squadrons in seconds. Quantum disruptors didn't just destroy matter. They made it forget it had ever existed, leaving behind voids where even spacetime itself had been erased. Kethvar watched in horror as half his fleet simply ceased to be. Not destroyed, unmade. As if they had never existed in the first place. His own memories began to shift as temporal weapons created paradoxes that made his fallen ships exist in quantum superposition, simultaneously destroyed and never built. "Retreat," he screamed. "All ships, full retreat." But there was nowhere to run. The humans had folded space itself into a cage, creating a pocket dimension where the laws of physics bent to their will. The Vrex found themselves trapped in a mathematical construct that their minds couldn't comprehend, fighting an enemy that existed partially outside causality itself. The human ship, designated Entropy, opened fire with weapons that reversed the arrow of time in localized areas. Vrex vessels aged billions of years in seconds, their hulls crumbling to dust as entropy accelerated to impossible speeds. Crews died of old age in moments, their screams cut short by the fundamental forces of decay compressed into milliseconds. But the most terrifying weapon in the human arsenal wasn't technological, it was psychological. The ISV mindbreak projected into the quantum neural networks that connected Vrek's crew members to their ships. But instead of attacking their minds, it showed them the truth about humanity. It forced them to experience the memories of the old war, to understand exactly what kind of species chooses to seal away the power to reshape reality itself. The Vrek soldiers found themselves living through human memories, the sight of entire star systems being rewritten at the quantum level, the horror of weapons that could make civilizations forget they had ever existed, the terrible burden of wielding power that could accidentally destroy the universe itself. They experienced the moment when humanity looked at what they had become and chose to forget, to become farmers and traders and peaceful explorers rather than remain gods of destruction. They felt the weight of that sacrifice, the deliberate choice to become vulnerable rather than remain monsters. And they understood why humans had hoped never to wake up again. Admiral Kethvar's flagship was the last vessel remaining, preserved by human mercy rather than Vrek's strength. Around him, his bridge crew wept as they processed the full scope of what they had challenged. They had attacked a species that had voluntarily given up the power to rewrite reality, thinking it made them weak. Instead, they had awakened something that had spent 2,000 years hoping it would never have to remember what it truly was. Torres' voice reached him one final time, carrying sadness rather than triumph. You had a choice, Kethvar. Every species we've encountered had a choice. Some chose wisdom. Some chose coexistence. You chose extinction, not just for yourselves, but for the idea that might makes right anywhere in this galaxy. The last thing Admiral Kethvar saw was the human fleet preparing to do something that defied comprehension. They were going to make the Vrek's empire retroactively never have existed. Not destroyed, but edited out of the timeline itself, as if 3,000 years of conquest and genocide had never happened. The galaxy would forget the Vreks had ever existed. But the species they had destroyed would remember, would wake up in a timeline where their homeworlds had never fallen. Humanity had become something beyond morality or ethics. They had become editors of reality itself. In the aftermath of what came to be known as the Vrek's paradox, the galaxy found itself fundamentally changed. Where once there had been an empire built on conquest and genocide, there was now simply empty space, not destroyed, but edited from existence so thoroughly that only those protected by human temporal shields could remember it had ever been. Admiral Jessica Torres stood in the memorial chamber aboard Prometheus Base, surrounded by holographic monuments to species that had been extinct for mere hours before humanity rewrote causality itself. The Altair Federation lived again. The crystal hegemony had never fallen. 47 civilizations that had been reduced to historical footnotes were now thriving societies, their people unaware they had ever died. The cost of such power was written in the faces of every human who had participated in the battle. They remembered what they had done, what they had chosen to become again. The weight of wielding forces that could rewrite the fundamental nature of existence showed in their eyes, aged beyond their years despite enhanced physiology that should have kept them young for centuries. Captain Marcus Reed joined her at the Central Memorial, a quantum construct that simultaneously honored the dead and the never dead, those who had been saved by humanity's terrible mercy. The diplomatic corps is reporting contact from over 200 species, he said quietly. They're all asking the same questions. Torres nodded. She had expected this. The galaxy had just witnessed something that challenged every assumption about the nature of power, morality, and existence itself. Humanity had demonstrated the ability to retroactively prevent genocide by erasing the genocidal empire from the timeline. But such power raised questions that had no easy answers. What are they asking? Whether we're gods, whether we're demons, whether there's any difference between the two when you can edit reality itself. The irony wasn't lost on Torres. 2,000 years ago, humanity had asked themselves the same questions and chosen to become something smaller, weaker, more vulnerable rather than remain entities that could reshape existence on a whim. They had chosen to be human rather than be gods. But godhood once tasted, leaves marks that never fully fade. On the diplomatic station New Geneva, rebuilt from quantum blueprints in the space of hours after the paradox, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what would become known as the Prometheus Accords. Ambassador Veltar of the restored Altair Federation served as primary mediator, one of the few beings with memories of both timelines. The questions they faced were unprecedented in galactic history. How do you negotiate with a species that can edit your existence? How do you form treaties with beings who can retroactively prevent your birth if they disapprove of your actions? How do you trust entities who have demonstrated they value life so highly they will rewrite reality to preserve it? The humans saved us, spoke Chancellor Yerix of the crystal hegemony, his crystalline form shimmering with confusion. But, in doing so, they've made themselves something beyond our comprehension. How do we coexist with editors of existence itself? Director Sarah Chun, speaking for humanity's civilian government, addressed the assembly with the weight of her species' choice visible in every word. We didn't want this power. We gave it up once, and we'll give it up again. The Prometheus Protocol was activated only because extinction was the alternative, not just for us, but for the idea that civilizations can choose to be better than their worst impulses. But you cannot unknow what you know, replied Ambassador Veltar. You cannot unfeel what it means to hold such power. How do we trust that you'll make the right choices? Sarah's answer was simple and devastating. The same way we trusted ourselves 2,000 years ago. We choose to be smaller than we could be. We choose limitations. We choose to remain human rather than become gods. The process of resealing humanity's weapons of mass reality was more complex than it had been millennia before. The technology had evolved, the power had grown, and the temptations had multiplied. But, across human space, the same choice was made again, to forget how to rewrite existence, to return to being farmers and traders and peaceful explorers. The sleeper fleet returned to quantum storage, its crews accepting another tour of duty that might last millennia. The stellar manipulators were deactivated, their energy borrowed from dying stars returned to cosmic circulation. Ships that existed partially outside spacetime folded themselves back into normal dimensions and powered down. But, this time, the choice came with conditions. The Prometheus archive remained partially active, its monitoring systems watching for threats that might require intervention on a reality-altering scale. Automated protocols were established, safeguards that would awaken humanity's terrible power only if genocide threatened to become the norm rather than the exception. More importantly, humanity established the Guardian Corps, volunteers who would remain awake and aware, carrying the burden of remembering what their species could become. They would live normal human lifespans, train successors, and serve as the living memory of choices too important to forget. Captain Reed accepted command of the 1st Guardian Unit, trading the enhanced longevity of his modifications for the knowledge that he would grow old and die knowing what humanity had sacrificed. It was a price he paid gladly. Immortal beings lost touch with the value of mortal life, and mortality was essential to remaining human. As the months passed, the galaxy began to adapt to its new reality. Trade resumed between species that remembered being enemies in a timeline that no longer existed. Diplomatic protocols were established for civilizations that now owed their existence to humanity's intervention. Art, music, and literature flourished as cultures explored the philosophical implications of retroactive salvation. But, perhaps most importantly, a new understanding emerged about the nature of power itself. The Prometheus paradox had demonstrated that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose restraint. Humanity had proven themselves the galaxy's most dangerous species not by conquering others, but by conquering themselves, by choosing repeatedly to be less than they could be in service of something greater. Ambassador Veltar summarized it best in his final report to the Galactic Council. We have learned that there are species in this universe capable of rewriting existence itself. More terrifyingly, we have learned that such species can choose to remain moral. The humans didn't just save us from the Vrex. They saved us from the fear that ultimate power inevitably corrupts. They showed us that gods can choose to remain human. Admiral Torres stood once more in the memorial chamber, preparing to enter the same cryogenic sleep that would take her away from a universe where her terrible knowledge was no longer needed. Around her, Prometheus Base powered down its reality-altering systems, returning to the quantum storage that had hidden it for 2 millennia. Before she slept, she recorded a final message for the Guardians who would watch over humanity's slumber. We are what we choose to be, not what we have the power to become. Remember that when the next crisis comes, and it will come, power without wisdom is destruction. Wisdom without power is impotence. But power restrained by wisdom, that is the closest thing to divinity that any species should aspire to achieve. The galaxy continued to turn, carrying civilizations that had learned something unprecedented, that the most dangerous species in the universe might also be the most trustworthy, because they had faced the ultimate test of power and chosen to remain human. In the depths of space, humanity returned to its peaceful slumber, hoping once again that they would never need to wake.